And welcome once again to another episode of Strange Planet. Thanks for sticking me in your ear. And if you'd like to get deeper into Strange Planet, you might want to consider becoming a premium subscriber. Just go to strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm. Strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm. The link is right there in the episode description. And there are 3 monthly tiers to choose from. Choose the one that's right for you, and you can gain access to commercial-free listening, bonus episodes, a subscription to my free monthly newsletter, Inner Sanctum, discounts on Strange Planet merchandise, and much more. On this episode, we're going to talk about the pyramids, the great pyramids of the Giza Plateau. Aleksander Czeszkiewicz is an independent researcher, author. He's passionate about ancient mysteries, metaphysics, and spirituality. He's read hundreds of books and experienced many mystical experiences, which led to the creation of his own vision of our surrounding reality. And he is the author of a couple of books. One is called Deja Vu, Has Everything Already Been? And the one we're going to discuss today is called The Giza Pyramids Alignment Guide, Ley Lines, Global Grid, and Astronomy. Aleksander, welcome to Strange Planet. How are you?
Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm fine, and I'm really honored to be here with you.
How did I do with the last name, Czeszkiewicz?
Yes, that's great, Czeszkiewicz.
All right, and you're joining us
really well.
You're joining us from Gdansk, Poland.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. How did someone from Gdansk, Poland, become so fascinated with the Giza pyramids?
I've been fascinated about the entire universe from my early childhood. I was always into science, into history, and stuff like that. It was always easy to me to pass some exams at school and go and win some contests, competitions, even like not international ones, but ones from the entire Poland. And because of that, I was really deep into history. I was deep into science. I knew very much about it. And one time in my middle high school, I attended a very great competition. And if you win that competition, you could go to whatever high school you want, everywhere in Poland. So I went to that competition, and it was a historical competition. And you have to know the history from the very beginnings of the prehistory, Neolithic Revolution, even the hominids before that, up until the modern times. And of course, I was preparing to that competition, and I've learned a lot about our history. But I asked myself a question: is it really all to history? Is it really the case that the only thing that we have to discover are some minor details about some particular periods which are more shadowy than others? Or could it be that there is much more to history? And as I mentioned, I've been fascinated also about the science. So I went to biology, and I found out that the anatomically modern humans appeared about 200,000 years ago. So it was a long time ago. And our history started during the Neolithic Revolution, somewhere 10,000 years BC, so 12,000 years ago. And from that point, I came to a conclusion that there is a lot of history to be discovered. And I think that we are too arrogant to think that nothing before the Neolithic Revolution happened, that there were no previous civilizations and stuff like that. I knew very well from the philosophy and history of the scientific thought that just 600 years ago, we thought that the roots of humanity go to the biblical Adam and Eve, and that our history began some 6,000 years ago. I also knew very well that we didn't know almost anything about civilizations of ancient Mesopotamia, like Sumeria, up until mid-1800s, like 1840s and stuff like that. So I thought, could it be that we are in a similar situation right now, just as we were like 200 years ago, totally ignorant of the existence of ancient Sumerian civilizations like those, despite having plenty of evidence for their existence and plenty of mentions in ancient texts and even in the Bible. Could it be that nowadays we are in a similar situation, that we have all those stories of lost civilizations that we consider to be just some fairy tales or the imagination of our ancestors? And could it be that we just haven't discovered them yet and they could really exist? And that's how my entire journey through lost civilizations and stuff like that began.
So let's talk about the Giza pyramids, specifically the Giza plateau. And for those who are not overly familiar with the plateau, there are three pyramids on the plateau. Of course, there's the Great Pyramid, which is the largest one, Khufu. There are two other ones, one sort of medium-sized and one smaller. Just give us kind of an overview, an overview of the pyramids on the Giza plateau.
Yes, there are the three main pyramids: the Pyramid of Khufu, also called Cheops by the Greeks; the Middle Pyramid, the Pyramid of Khafre, or Khafren in Greek. And actually, this Middle Pyramid is a little bit bigger than the Great Pyramid because it is situated a little bit higher on some, high ground. So it appears to be larger, but actually when it comes to the pyramid, to the building, to the monument, it is a little bit smaller than the Great Pyramid. And we've got the third pyramid, the Pyramid of Menkaure. And also we've got some satellite pyramids just beneath those pyramids, and also some temples like the Sphinx Temple. Also, we've got the famous Great Sphinx and many of other smaller structures.
So the official version of the Giza Plateau pyramids, the Great Pyramids, is that they were built by three different pharaohs during the Fourth Dynasty. What's the time? The epoch we're talking about, supposedly, that when they were built?
It is about circa 2500 years BC. And it is very interesting because it is just 500 years after the beginning of the ancient Egyptian civilization. And from that time, after the building of those three greatest pyramids, we've got a huge regress when it comes to the building techniques, especially when it comes to the pyramid building techniques. That's why plenty of researchers, alternative researchers like Graham Hancock, Robert Bovell, and many others propose that the pyramids may be much older than that. And we, of course, have some evidence for that assertions.
Right. Okay, so let's start with the structure of the pyramids. Embedded with something called the golden ratio. This is a proportion that's found everywhere in nature. Our ancestors knew about it. Tell me about the golden ratio and how it is embedded in the pyramid structures themselves.
It is the best example is within the Great Pyramid of Giza. We've got actually what is called a Kepler triangle, which is about the golden ratio, the famous number 5. And we've got the Kepler triangle within the Great Pyramid, which in my opinion isn't a coincidence. And I think that the pyramid builders knew very well about golden ratio. Also, some researchers point that there is a golden spiral when it comes to the alignment of those pyramids. But of course, these are somewhat less legitimate because you have to take some point as the middle point and then just, draw the spiral. And I think that, of course, this example is also a great example, but I think that the best example that is showing us that the structure of the Great Pyramid and its dimensions weren't accidental is the Kepler triangle within. Also, we've got the number pi within the Great Pyramid, and actually the slope of the pyramid is designating the number pi. So the Great Pyramid of Giza is a real mathematical machine. And also we've got, I think we'll talk about it a little bit later, we've got some geographical alignments that are pointing to a very, very high knowledge of our ancestors, whoever they were who built those pyramids.
We'll definitely get into the the geographical alignments
Mm-hmm.
and the astronomical ones as well. But I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the golden ratio. Now,
Mm-hmm.
according to official Egyptology, was the golden ratio known to the ancient Egyptians?
No, it wasn't known, and it is very interesting because from the sources we have, it appears that ancient Egyptians just knew basic mathematics like those that are taught today at our primary school. And there was no golden ratio, there was no number phi, also no number pi. And actually, some historians tell us that in ancient times and in ancient Egypt, the number pi was about 3, not 3.14 and stuff like that. And actually, the number pi in the Great Pyramid is much more accurate than that. Also, it is interesting because the ancient Egyptians, from what we know from the texts we have, were somewhat very primitive. They thought that the earth is totally flat and that it is very limited. They just thought that the earth is what they know, like the Egyptian land and some lands just over the border of the Egypt. So they had very primitive knowledge when it comes to mathematics and when it comes to the geography.
Um, would they also, do you suspect, were the ancient Egyptians also aware of things like the Fibonacci sequence?
No, I think that they weren't. And we do not have any mainstream evidence for that. Only like the pyramids and, the non-conventional evidence.
All right, so let's talk about the remarkable geographical alignment of the three pyramids.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes. Mm-hmm.
so, if we, well, you explain after laying out the sort of the Giza plateau. So, in our mind's eye, we can imagine you've got in the if the lower sort of left hand corner of the plateau, we've got the Menkaure pyramid. In the middle, we've
Mm-hmm.
got the Khafre pyramid, which appears larger than the Great Pyramid, but it's a little bit smaller, except it's up higher. And then
Mm-hmm.
up in the right hand corner, we've got Khufu, the Great Pyramid. So, with that in mind, with that layout in mind, just explain some interesting
Mm-hmm.
alignments that we can find um, by drawing lines through, I guess, one corner of the
Mm-hmm.
Menkaure up into the Khufu pyramid.
Mm-hmm. It's not only like that, but it is also that the Great Pyramid of Giza appears to be just a pyramid, like 4 corners, right, and a top. But actually, the Great Pyramid at Giza has 8 corners, and it only can be shown during the it is not solstice, it is not solstice during a specific time at the year when the night and day have the same amount of hours during the day,
Equinox?
like equinox. Exactly, I forgot the word, sorry. So during the equinox, we can see that the Great Pyramid of Giza has actually 4 corners, and we've got some niches within the sides of the pyramids which are not visible during the casual day. Only during the equinox we've got these 4 corners. It is very interesting because in the 19th century, the Scottish royal astronomer Charles Piazzi Smith proposed and showed on the map that if we provide 8 lines from all of those 8 corners that appear during the solstice, during the equinox, then those lines which are like plus and which are like x go and connect the most landmass of on our planet. So the most lands are connected by those lines, which is like the geographical center of the landmass. And many people think that it is accidental. Some even point that there are newer geographical analyses that point that the center of landmass is located in Turkey. But when it comes to these newer analyses, these are based on locating the land by the circle. Like we've got some point on the map in Turkey and we measure like what area, what the most area is around this place. And I think that it isn't like that, and that it isn't accidental that those lines from the 8 corners of the pyramid point to the biggest landmass on our planet. And it's very interesting because, again, it is only visible during the equinox. And during the equinox, the day and night is approximately 12 hours. We've got 12 hours day, 12 hours night. And ancient Egyptians knew that very well. We've got information that ancient Egyptians divided time during their day to 12 daily hours and 12 hours of night. And it is also interesting that the Great Pyramid of Giza is a model of the northern hemisphere of the Earth on the scale of 1 to 43,200, which is what? The number of seconds in half a day. So we've got an interesting correlation that we've got the equinox, during which there is half day, half night. We've got the model of half of this hemisphere of the Earth, so half of the Earth, right, the northern hemisphere, and we've got these lines that point to the biggest landmass only during this equinox. And also the scale of this model of the northern hemisphere is the number of seconds in half a day, like during the equinox. So I think that it isn't accidental, and we know very well that the system of measurement of time, like dividing by 12, dividing by 60 and stuff like that, was used during the ancient times. So I think that it isn't accidental, and it points to some correlation between space and time, like half a day, half of Earth. And I think that it isn't accidental. And also later, not in my book that are published, but in my later books, I will show that ancient Egyptians knew about the dimensions of our planet. And I think that it is one of the elements of the puzzle when it comes to those dimensions. So there is embedded an exact knowledge of the landmass of the Earth, of the equinox, and of the geography and dimensions of our planet.
So you mentioned the 19th century astronomer Charles Piazzi Smith. So what he was, just to summarize this concept, what he was suggesting was that the Great Pyramid of Giza, or at least the plateau and the 3 pyramids together, really should be considered the prime meridian of our planet. I mean, we think of the prime meridian as Greenwich, England, but the prime meridian should be Giza.
Exactly. And when it comes to other ancient sites, some other researchers like Ranflam Ath and Colin Wilson proposed that if we were to choose actually this prime meridian as the Great Pyramid, and that was exactly what Charles Piazzi Smith wanted to do before assigning the prime meridian to Greenwich, was that other megalithic sites and monumental structures, temples of the entire ancient world would really fit and align to some very harmonic coordinates, like
we'll get to that in a minute. Sorry,
Okay.
Alexander. I just want to jump in here because we're gonna get to that right after this. We're talking about the Giza pyramids and ley lines, the global grid, and astronomy with researcher, author Aleksander Czeszkiewicz. Back with more in a moment. Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Serrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Serrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Serrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there. Welcome back. We're here with Aleksander Czeszkiewicz, independent researcher and author. And his books include Deja Vu, Has Everything Already Been in Search of a Previous Lost Civilization? And right now we're talking about, it's a neat and tidy little guide, about, maybe 50 pages. It's called the Giza Pyramids Alignment Guide, Ley Lines, Global Grid, and Astronomy. So you mentioned some of the other ancient structures that the alignment of the three pyramids seem to point to. So let's explain how this works. Let's say, for example, Gobekli Tepe. How do the three pyramids point directly at Gobekli Tepe?
Gobekli Tepe is an interesting site because, as I mentioned, during the last century, there were plenty of theories which were proposing that the roots of our civilization go much further back into the history, like the Giza Sphinx, water erosion, or the alignment of the pyramids pointing to some very remote eras. There were plenty of theories, but at that time, scholars and mainstream archaeologists were laughing at them because they said that there were no people at very remote times who were capable of building monumental structures. But then, at the end of the 1990s, we discovered Gobekli Tepe, which is a set of megalithic rings like those at Stonehenge, which are dated to circa even 12,000 years ago, which is the Neolithic Revolution, which is the point during our history during which we switched from the nomadic life of hunter-gatherers and simple cavemen to the sedentary lifestyle. And when it comes to Gobekli Tepe, it is, according to many researchers, one of the keys to those lost civilizations. And it is aligned when it comes to the layout of the Giza pyramids, because when we take a line from the smallest pyramid of Menkaura, from the corner of that pyramid, through all the pyramids back to the opposite corner of the Great Pyramid, we have a line that points to the Gobekli Tepe. And this line is actually within 1.5 degrees. And some researchers pointed out that it may be aligned or it may not. And I think that it could be aligned, but some researchers pointed that 1.5 degrees is too much when it comes to the precision of the Great Pyramid of Giza, which is much higher, much greater.
But that 1.5 degree discrepancy, which is quite small when you think about the distance,
Yes.
it's pointing up towards Turkey, the location of Gobekli Tepe. It's off by 1.5 degrees, but that could be explained through, 10,000 years of plate tectonics?
Yes, sure.
All right. So the other interesting aspect is, let's say that the official Egyptologists who and their dating of the Great Pyramids somewhere around 2500 BC. If Gobekli Tepe is, let's say, 10,000 BC or even older, why
Yes,
would
it can be.
if the pyramids were only 2500 BC, why would they be pointing at a structure that's 10,000, maybe 10,000 years older than they were? But
Yes.
if they're more contemporary, it would make more sense. So that argues for the Great Pyramids being much, much older.
Yes, for sure. It argues like that. And some researchers point out, because there is this debate, are the pyramids like 10,500 years BC, to which date they are aligned astronomically? I will talk about it a little bit later. Or are they just dated to those mainstream terms of 2,500 years BC? And this alignment to Göbekli Tepe may point that the pyramids are much older, or maybe, and it could really help us understand why there is such a discrepancy of 1.5 degree. It may be that the layout of those pyramids, like the site on which they were built, was aligned much older than that, and the pyramids could have been built later on some previous ancient sites, maybe on some previous temples. Who knows? And it is very interesting because similar things were done, for instance, in Europe. Many cathedrals were placed on some megalithic foundations and in many other parts of the world. So the pyramids may be older, they may not be older, but the site is for sure much older than that.
All right, so that brings us to another ancient site. Now we're looking at Lebanon here,
Mm-hmm.
and the ancient site of Baalbek. For those not familiar with Baalbek, just explain what that site looks like, what it's all about.
Yes, Baalbek is mostly known from its Greek and Roman origins later during the antiquity and from many temples that are situated on that site, which were allegedly built by ancient Greeks and ancient Romans. And Baalbek has very, very ancient roots, and actually archaeologists found that there are traces of human habitation in Baalbek even 12,000 years ago. So it wouldn't surprise us if we were to find out that Baalbek is much older. But Baalbek is most famous for its huge blocks. We've got the trilithon, the 3 blocks on one of the walls of Baalbek, which weigh up to even 800 tons and which are placed very, very high, which are placed on other blocks. It isn't just, taking a huge block by hundreds or even thousands of people and placing it somewhere on the ground. It is placed like, I don't know, 5 or 6 meters even above the ground. But also in Baalbek, we found many unfinished blocks at the quarry, which weigh even up to 1,650 tons, which is a very heavy block. And we've got few of those blocks. It isn't just one block. We've got like 2 or even 3 of such huge blocks, which were to be placed at Baalbek. And who knows if some of blocks like those aren't somewhere deeply hidden beneath those Roman and Greek temples. It is very possible. And when it comes to the Giza aligning to Baalbek, again, we this time take the point from the corner of the middle pyramid of Khafre and take it again through the opposite corner of the Great Pyramid of Giza. And here the discrepancy is only half of degree, which is, in my opinion, not accidental.
So again, this time you take it the opposite corner of the middle pyramid, Khafre. You run that diagonal line through the Great Pyramid and its opposite corner, and now this time it is pointing directly to the ancient site of Baalbek in Lebanon. And the discrepancy is only 0.4
0.4
degrees, which is pretty accurate. And again, the estimated, what epoch are we talking about here for Baalbek?
As I mentioned, most of the above-ground buildings and monuments are said to be built by Greeks and Romans during like the late antiquity compared to the pyramids of Giza. But we actually do not know how old they are because we cannot date inorganic materials like stones. It is impossible. We can only date things made of organic materials like of carbon. We can carbon date them. And when it comes to the Gobekli Tepe, because many people may ask how Gobekli Tepe was dated. It was dated because it was buried intentionally during the prehistoric times. And we know that those 12,000 years ago is the time of the burial of those megaliths. And those megaliths, of course, can be much even older than that. The same with Baalbek, but here no megaliths were buried and we cannot say from what era during our history they are, but we can speculate. And as I mentioned, we've got some traces, archaeological mainstream traces of a lifestyle, of sedentary lifestyle of people here at Baalbek during the very remote era, again, about 12,000 years ago, which is similar to that of Gobekli Tepe.
I don't think you addressed this in the book, but maybe we can speculate a little bit. Since we can draw lines through the pyramid's opposite corners, and one points to Gobekli Tepe, another points to Baalbek, has anyone attempted to see if the pyramids at Giza line up with other ancient sites, let's say Stonehenge, for example?
Mhm. Yes, there were attempts, many attempts. There were attempts to actually show the ancient grid of monuments and pyramids. And I think the best attempt of that one was from Graham Hancock, and one was from two researchers, Colin Wilson and Rand van Ath, in their book The Atlantis Blueprint. And it is very detailed because there are plenty of ancient sites, but those sites are actually aligned. If we take again, Giza as the prime meridian of the planet, then other sites are aligned to very harmonic like degrees, like 30 degrees south, 30 degrees, not south, because we are talking about east and west, like 30 degrees east, 30 degrees west, and stuff like that. So there were attempts, and even during the time of Soviet Union, Russian researchers found out that if we overlay a grid of dodecahedron and icosahedron on our planet,
Explain what those are.
yes, I want to explain.
Okay.
Icosahedron is a platonic solid. Platonic solids are the basic polygons. So like cube, like dodecahedron, icosahedron. Dodecahedron is a polyhedron which has exactly 12 sides, and all sides of this polyhedron are equal. And we've got only 5 of these universal platonic solids in nature. This is the basic of geometry. Like we've got cube, which has 6 sides, and all of those sides are just squares. And all of those sides are squares, and all of the angles are the same. The same with other of those platonic solids like tetrahedron, which has triangles on its sides and the same angles inside of it. The same with dodecahedron, which has, as I mentioned, 12 sides, 12 actually pentagons. It's also very interesting because those pentagons are also connected to, for instance, the golden ratio, but this is too complicated, I think, without showing it on screen. And we've got those platonic solids, which are basics of mathematics, of the geometry. And those platonic solids, like dodecahedron and icosahedron, were speculated by the Russian to be inside of our planet. Like nowadays, we think that the interior of our planet is the core, which is somewhere like a ball inside, a very hot ball inside of our planet. But Russian scientists speculated that the inner core can be not a ball, but it can be a dodecahedron or an icosahedron. And this theory can actually explain, for instance, anomalies all over the world. Because if our core was a gigantic dodecahedron, which is regular, but which isn't like a ball that everyone on Earth, the ball is on the same depth. But when it comes to the dodecahedron, there could be some apices of that dodecahedron that would go even to our surface of our planet. And Russian scientists speculated that if that dodecahedron inside of our planet was a crystal, it could lead to electromagnetic anomalies like those at the Bermuda Triangle or in the Alaska or in many other places of our planet. I explained that in my other book, Deja Vu Has Everything Already Been. And Russian scientists found out that if we overlay that dodecahedron and icosahedron on our planet, the lines connecting those figures would actually cross about 3,000 of different ancient megalithic sites, including the pyramids. So it is again connected to what we are talking about. If we have some other alignment than just Gobekli Tepe and the Baalbek at Lebanon, and there may be plenty of more connections. And even Plato in his dialogue Phaedrus tell us that the planet, when we see it from above, is like a 12-sided ball. And 12-sided ball is nothing else than the dodecahedron that the Russians spoke of. So even Plato is telling us that our planet is to some extent a dodecahedron. It isn't like a ball, or just its core is like dodecahedron.
All right, Alexander, we'll take a timeout, come back, and we'll talk about the astronomical alignment of the Giza pyramids. Back with more in a moment. Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there. Aleksander Czeszkiewicz stays with us. The Giza Pyramids Alignment Guide, Ley Lines, Global Grid, and Astronomy, fully illustrated, and it's a tidy little book. You can read it probably in less than half an hour. How do we get a copy, Aleksander?
You can find it out on the Amazon, wherever you are on our planet. On most of the Amazons, it's available.
All right, so let's talk about, I think many people are familiar with how the 3 pyramids on the Giza Plateau align with the 3 stars in the Orion constellation. Let's just sort of walk us through that.
Yes, the Orion constellation was very important to the ancient Egyptians because it was one of the basic stuff when it comes to the afterlife. They believed that the soul, whatever spirit, actually at the moment of death is shot to those stars of the Orion Belt constellation. Also, the Orion constellation, including the Orion Belt of the 3 stars Al-Nilam, Al-Nitak, and Mintaka, was actually shown as the god of the underworld, Osiris. So it was known through ancient Egypt. But it is very interesting because the 3 pyramids are also aligned to those 3 stars of the Orion Belt. And even some shafts in the Great Pyramid of Giza appear to actually be like directed to those stars of Orion Belt, which may be the case that in this tomb theory that the pyramids were tombs for the pharaohs, the soul or spirit of the pharaoh was actually shot to the Orion Belt. And it is interesting because Graham Hancock found out that the same belief system can be actually found in the Native Americans, who also believe that the Orion Belt is connected to the journey, to the travel of the soul, and that there may be some portal just at the Orion Belt, just somewhere where those 3 stars are on the sky. So it is very interesting because here we've got some connections that are not just accidental, but that cross the borders of any known ancient cultures. And when it comes to this alignment, we've got this alignment not only, as I mentioned, of the 3 pyramid, just as seen from above, that they are aligned to the 3 stars of the Orion Belt. And we know exactly well that there was an ancient maxim, as above, so below, which was actually practiced during the times of ancient Egypt. And we know that ancient Egyptians were very deeply into the astronomy. But also that alignment can be found, for instance, in the 3 pyramids in Teotihuacan, the pyramid of the sun, moon, and the 3rd one. And it's the same alignment, but here we are talking about Mesoamerica, thousands of kilometers apart, and an entire Atlantic apart. Is it accidental? I don't think so. And also the same alignment to the Orion Belt can be found in the pyramids in China, in Xi'an. Also, 3 pyramids are aligned to the Orion Belt. And it's very interesting because some may say that these are some correlations, just one correlation here, one there, but we see plenty of correlations. Not only are all of those three pyramids in three different places on our planet connected to the Orion belt, but also there are similar beliefs about the afterlife. And also the base side of the biggest pyramid in Mexico is the same as the base of the Great Pyramid of Giza. So I think that it isn't accidental that there was some ancient knowledge or belief system that spanned across the entire globe and which may connect to that like global grid of megaliths aligned to certain sites on the entire planet.
So in other words, whoever built the Great Pyramids, whether it was 10,000 BC or 2500 BC, but likely older than 2500 BC, whoever built them were also responsible, the same civilization that built pyramids in the New World in Central and South America, and also in places like China. Of course, we have a pyramid in Serbia. The same people responsible, the same civilization responsible for building them all.
Maybe not the same civilization, but maybe it was the same knowledge. Like all over the world, we find mentions of some gods or some demigods or some teachers of mankind or some sages that were traveling throughout the ancient world and teaching the just primitive humans like cavemen basics of lifestyle. And we find mentions of them all over the world. I cover it in my book, Deja Vu Has Everything Already Been. And they are often connected with some catastrophe, like the Great Flood. We've got the seven Apkallu, seven teachers of ancient Mesopotamia that are taken onto the ark with the main hero, whether it is Atrahasis or Zusudra. We also have seven rishis, seven sages in the myths of India. And here we've got Manu, the Hindu Noah, who takes onto his ark seven sages, just like in Mesopotamia. Also, we've got the biblical story of Noah, and when we count people who are taken onto the Noah's ark, there is also Noah, the main hero, and seven other people, because there is Noah's wife, three of Noah's sons, and three wives of his sons. So seven people. And we've got seven people in India, in Mesopotamia, and in the Bible. Also, all over the world, we find some other mentions of teachers of mankind. In Egypt, there is a mention that Osiris was teaching primitive people not to kill and eat themselves, each other, because they were practicing cannibalism at that time. So it may be that there were some teachers who traveled around the world and were teaching humanity basics of sedentary lifestyle or pyramid building, or maybe they even taught them about those afterlife beliefs and the Orion Belt constellation.
Aleksander, you've also got a YouTube channel. What happens on the YouTube channel?
Yes, it's Aleksander Czeszkiewicz Global, but I've been focusing more on my Polish one, but now I will be recording many more videos in English. So I invite all of you to my YouTube channel in English, Aleksander Czeszkiewicz Global.
All right, and the link is in the episode notes as well. And again, the book is The Giza Pyramids, Alignment Guide, Ley Lines, Global Grid, and Astronomy. Also, Deja Vu Has Everything Already Been, In Search of a Previous Lost Civilization. Aleksander, great meeting you. Thank you. I learned a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Great interview.
Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there. And welcome once again to another edition of Strange Planets. And if you'd like to get deeper into this podcast, you might consider becoming a premium subscriber. It's real easy to do. Just go to strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm, strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm. The link is in the episode description. There are 3 monthly programs to choose from. Choose the one that's right for you. You get lots of bonus material, commercial-free listing, a subscription to my free monthly newsletter, discounts on merchandise, and much more. On this edition, you wake up in a pitch-black bedroom. You can't move. A nefarious black shadow begins to walk slowly, ominously towards you. You try to scream, but nothing comes out. Has this ever happened to you? If it has, you're not alone. Online statistics estimate anywhere from 17 to 15% of the population has reported experiencing sleep paralysis at least once in their lifetime. Most people describe the experience as terrifying and attribute it to some sort of paranormal or demonic experience. But what most sufferers of sleep paralysis really want to know is, what is it, really? Why are these entities targeting me? And how can I stop it? Vicki Joy Anderson is here to share her research and belief as she attempts to answer these questions. Vicki is a graduate from the University of Northwestern in St. Paul, Minnesota, majoring in Bible and English with a writing emphasis. After many years in corporate management, Vicki Joy stepped out in faith to become a full-time author and speaker in 2019. And the name of her book is They Only Come Out at Night. Vicki Joy, welcome. How are you?
Hi, Richard. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm doing great.
So, of all of the paranormal phenomena that are out there and that are being widely reported, why did you choose to focus on sleep paralysis?
Well, it chose me, Richard. It is something that has been happening to me since I was a very young girl. I have a hunch it probably started before my memories of it began, but my memories of it began around 4 years old, and they were intense and they were frequent. And so it wasn't until I was in my early to mid 30s that I even knew sleep paralysis was what it was called. I had no idea anyone else was experiencing this. I thought it was just this weird, fluky thing happening to me. I didn't ever talk about it because one time in high school, I had told a friend about it. I had confided in a friend, and she was very sympathetic and she believed me. And it was kind of like the best case scenario for how someone would respond. But by Monday morning, she had gone and spoken to her mother and various other people, and they had all very kindly diagnosed me behind my back. And she came back to school and told me that I was demon possessed and needed to get myself to the First Catholic Church to get an exorcism. So I realized at that point in time that this isn't the kind of thing that you can really talk to other people about. So when I discovered that sleep paralysis was an actual thing and that other people were suffering from it, that's when I decided to research it out and try to get to the bottom of exactly what is this thing.
Can you go into a little more detail of what your experiences were like?
Yeah, absolutely. So my experiences, in contrast to some of them, might seem kind of anticlimactic. There's a lot of people out there who have much more phenomenal stories to tell than mine. I think what made mine unique is how frequent they were. I would typically have them, days and days in a row, sometimes a week in a row, 8 days in a row. It'd go away for a little bit, it would come back. It happened to me for about 23 years. I had a nice, wonderful little hiatus, and then it came back full force in about 2011 and kind of followed me for another five years or so. But my experience is kind of what I call the classic case. And it's where you wake up and you cannot move. You're not 100% sure if you're still dreaming or if you're awake. You think you're awake though, because you can see your bedroom, and but you can't move, and you sense or sometimes see a shadow person in the room. You have very distinct conversations in your head that are sinister. You feel tremendous amounts of fear. You believe that your soul is in the hands of whatever this thing is. They're taunting you, they're mocking you. You think you're going to be dragged to hell. And it's a very short kind of an experience, but it does sort of follow you then into the physical. And a lot of people that have sleep paralysis experiences will talk about how this feeling of foreboding and this looking over their shoulder kind of feeling, this oppressive weight in the room, it can follow them for days, if not weeks. And so sometimes, even though that is not as intense as the actual episode, it's what makes it a very exhausting, physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally exhausting experience for the people that do experience it on a regular basis.
How did you ever get rest? How did you continue to function in your waking life?
You kind of learn to survive. And what's funny, Richard, and I'm really glad you asked that question, because a lot of people don't ask me that question. I think that when you're in survival mode, whether it's sleep paralysis or a bad marriage or a job you hate, you're kind of in survival mode, and you're doing what you have to do. Like, I've got to do this for the kids. I've got to make a paycheck, or I can't pay rent. You do what you have to do. And it really isn't until you can retrospectively look at it in hindsight, or you get to a place of healing, or you get to a place of closure where you look back on it and then you ask that question that you just asked, like, how in the world did I even do that? Because along with the exhaustion, you don't get good sleep, you don't get good quality sleep. And along with it, then there's a lot of paranoia, there's a lot of confusion, then there's high levels of anxiety and depression that you don't necessarily equate with the sleep paralysis, which is another thing that makes it, I think, difficult. Is you've got this thing that's kind of like the glaring elephant in the room, and then you've got all these other things in the periphery of your life that are kind of like, in a downward spiral, and you never really put two and two together that all those things are connected to the sleep paralysis. And so one of the things that I don't think is talked about a lot, if at all, with sleep paralysis sufferers, people are so sort of enamored with telling the ghost story aspect of it, that a lot of people don't bring into the discussion the self-care that is needed, and the rest and the nutrition and just the emotional well-being sort of things that you need to do to kind of recoup from this. And it never dawned on me to do that. And so it kind of is like anything, you kind of have to hit rock bottom before you say, you know what, I'm really sick of this and I want my life back. And you have to kind of take control and say, I'm taking my life back, because it'll suck the life out of you.
Your friend's mother, who diagnosed you and said you need to get to a Catholic priest.
Yeah.
I mean, is that so far afield? I mean, it sounds demonic.
Yes, absolutely. This is the ironic thing. I think in many cases there is a very spiritual element to this, and it could be demonic. It can be astral. But it can also it can be other things as well, or I should say, it could be a multiplicity of things going on all at the same time. And for me personally, just my experiences, it's one thing if you have a nightmare, it's one thing if you've got a lot of stress or trauma in your life, and all those things were certainly true for me at the time. But I like to kind of say tongue in cheek that when the Grim Reaper shows up and says he's dragging your soul to hell, at that point, you have to understand that there is something spiritual going on. That's not spaghetti before you go to bed kind of thing.
And in your case, was there a Grim Reaper?
There were the Shadow Men and the Hat Man, yes. I am really happy that a lot of my experiences when I was with my eyes open in my bedroom, I didn't see a lot of things. It was scary enough just knowing that there was something in the room. I don't know how I would have handled it if I had started seeing things manifesting, and many people do. And they talk about shadow people, and they talk about the black mists on the ceiling, or This is one thing I hear a lot is people will say, I didn't see an actual figure, but there was an area of my room that was blacker than the rest of the room. It was a darker, so it wasn't quite a shadow man, but it was a darkness. And you hear a lot about creatures with red eyes, but then you hear about kind of like the typical horror movie fodder. You hear about the woman in the rocking chair in the corner of the room, and the old hag, and the incubus and the succubus, and gargoyles and leprechauns, and of course the alien greys. They make a lot of appearances in these episodes as well.
Well, that's a good launching pad right there. Is there a connection between sleep paralysis and the classic alien abduction scenario?
I think there is. And if you'd asked me this even 5 years ago, I might have not really thought so. If you'd asked me 10 years ago, I would have said no way. But I absolutely think that there is a strong connection now, and I'll let you know why. There's a lot of differences, mainly that UFO abductees, they can be in their car, they can be, out in the cornfield. They don't have to be in a sleep situation, but there are sleep paralysis scenarios. And I can usually tell within 30 seconds of someone telling me their sleep paralysis story if it's a UFO version or if it is an astral version. Some of the main differences are that sleep paralysis experiences that are of the UFO kind, instead of the room being pitch black, the room is filled with light. And instead of creatures and entities hovering at the door, it's usually the window. And instead of an out-of-body experience where you're floating towards the ceiling, you're usually being pulled horizontally out a door or out a window specifically. And then obviously the entities involved are different. Instead of shadow people and ghouls and demons, you'll see the greys. And if you get further along in the UFO experience, people will talk about the reptilians. They'll talk about the praying mantis kind of figures. These are the ones that typically show up in the UFO experience. The destination is different. A lot of the sleep paralysis, that they'll end up in the astral realm. And UFO people, of course, end up in laboratories. It's a lot more of a medical type of an experience. A lot of people with sleep paralysis, it's more of a sexual attack or a ascended master spirit guide, ayahuasca almost like experience, whereas with the UFOs, it's more of a clinical setting and an experimentation type of a setting. But the similarities, and this is where I think that they are attached, is I do think that both of them are abduction scenarios. And I don't hear a lot of other people talking about this. I think Jim Wilhelmsen has made a couple comments. I think Tim Alberino has made a couple comments. But just even in my own experience, for me, the sleep paralysis episode always started deep within an REM cycle. I would be having a regular dream. Everything would go great. And it would be just like in the movies where all of a sudden there would be this shift in scenery and everything would go dark. The sound would change. The atmosphere would change. There would be vibrational sound effects, and you would go lucid and you would say, oh no, what's happening again? Not another one of these dreams. Oh no, oh no, oh no. And then all of a sudden you're awake in your room and you're contending with this paralyzation and these entities and such. And typically when you talk to someone who's had a sleep paralysis scenario, they are only going to tell you about that point where they're in semi-consciousness in their bedroom. A lot of people, they don't even take it back to the fact that it started in their dream. And I don't know that everybody always remembers that that's happening. And I've talked to enough people who have had this experience where they'll wake up in the morning having no memory whatsoever of a nightmare, a bad dream, restless sleep, sleep paralysis. They'll have no memory of anything but a peaceful sleep. But a spouse or someone else in the house will say, what was going on with you last night? You were screaming, you were thrashing around, you were making noises, you were crying out to the name of Jesus. And the person will say, what are you talking about? I don't remember any of that. So what I think is happening, this is just a hypothesis of mine, Richard, based on my own experience, based on the hundreds of case studies and people I've talked to. And my hypothesis right now is that this isn't just waking up in your room and there being a presence in your room just there to spook you. I think that this is the same thing as the UFO experiencers in that it is an abduction scenario. It is happening deep within REM sleep. You're being pulled out of body into the astral realm. And when you wake up, the part of sleep paralysis that everyone thinks is the whole of sleep paralysis, I think is the very tail end. You're being thrown back into your body. You're waking up abruptly, and you're waking up so fast, you're still in that altered state. And I don't want to lose my thought here, Richard, but what's going on there is similar to UFO abductions. People don't remember what happened. They usually have to go into regression or hypnotherapy. They have to have something to recover the memories. The only reason they know something has happened is there's missing time. And this is the diabolical piece to the sleep paralysis experience. When you wake up at 6:30 a.m., 8:30 a.m., you've been down for 5, 6, 7, 8 hours. No one is going to wake up in the morning with 8 hours past and question what happened to that time. So the thing that triggers someone into thinking something's happened, we lose that ability with sleep paralysis. And even if we do remember snippets of it, what do you hear? Oh man, I had the craziest dream last night. Or, oh man, I had the worst dream last night. And those are those days where you can't quite get it together all day, and you think it's because you didn't get enough sleep, or it's because you were restless. And what I think is happening is the main portion of the sleep paralysis experience is actually in the dream world, and it's what's being forgotten, and it's what's not being taken seriously by people because it was just a dream. And what's really fascinating to me about the sleep paralysis phenomenon is when people explain the physiology of it. My heart is beating, I can't move, you've got fight or flight going on. You have people where they're on their back, their mouth is wide open, all the saliva in their mouth is dried out. What you basically have here is the body telling you that you are in a full adrenaline survival mode. You're in a full adrenaline rush. And I think what's happening there is a schism between your mind and your heart and your memories and your soul and your body. Your body is screaming to you that it has just underwent some sort of trauma, but your brain and your mind and your memories can't resolve why you are in those high levels of adrenaline. And it's easy then to just chalk it off to, I have these high levels of adrenaline because when I woke up, I saw something in my room. But I almost think that the entities in the room is almost like smoke and mirrors. It's almost like a trick. They appear in the room to give you a reason to ascribe all of those physiological things going on in your body. You can say this is all happening because I saw this scary thing in my room. But what I think is, I don't think that the body is initially really reacting to the presence in the room. It's reacting many times, not 100% of the time, but many times for people who have habitually had this experience over and over again. I think that the main crux of the trauma is actually going on in the dream world. And when you wake up, you're missing the memory, and you don't understand that there's missing time because it's not unusual to wake up and have so many hours having passed.
Vicki Joy Anderson, they only come out at night, exposing the dark weapon of sleep paralysis. Quick time out, back with more of our conversation. Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there. Vicki Joy Anderson, They Only Come Out at Night, Exposing the Dark Weapon of Sleep Paralysis. You mentioned that the similarities, we were talking about the similarities between sleep paralysis and an alien abduction, where with an alien abduction, you're taken aboard a craft. It's kind of a medical type situation. Here, perhaps the abduction is taking place in the astral realm during dream, during REM. Have you undergone a regression, or have any of the case studies that you've talked with, have any of them undergone a regression? And if so, what was discovered?
I have not. And the people that I have spoken to who have underwent a regression have all been the ones that have had the sleep paralysis indicative of a UFO abduction. You know, it seems to be that when people come to grips or come back to the memory that they've had the UFO experience, it's just par for the course to then go and seek those types of therapies. But with sleep paralysis, because this has never, I think, really been associated with sleep paralysis, I don't think people even think that way. I don't think they even go that route in their mind. And so a lot of the people that I talk to, sleep paralysis, unlike UFO abductions, now obviously there's a lot of people who have underwent UFO abductions that believe that there's something spiritual or demonic to that. But there's also a lot of people out there who just ascribe it to government cover-ups or actual existing aliens and shadow operations and things like that. Whereas with the sleep paralysis experience, because we're dealing with demons and specific things about being dragged to hell and whatever, I think more people ascribe that to a spiritual experience. So rather than going to doctors, I think a lot of them seek more spiritual counseling. And so they more go to the ghost hunters, the mediums, the pastors, the priests. And so it would be interesting to me to speak to someone who has had sleep paralysis and has had some sort of a regression, because I don't think a lot of people put two and two together, that there's parts of the sleep paralysis episode that they're not remembering, because the part that you do remember, you remember with clarity. All five senses are involved. And someone who's had sleep paralysis can explain in great detail what they smelled, what they felt, what they tasted, what they touched. So I don't think it really dawns on most of us that there's pieces of that we're missing or that we don't remember.
If I might ask, why haven't you undergone a regression?
I think for me, I think that when I came to grips with what I thought was happening, I wasn't really curious in the exact details. I'm not sure that I really need to know. You know, for me, I went down more of a spiritual route, and I started doing a lot of research on covenants and threshold covenants. There's a great chapter in the book. It's probably the most talked about chapter in the book. Chapter 4 in the book is called Threshold Covenants and
Oops, sorry, you froze there.
Sleep paralysis demonic entities are really where we get our modern vampire mythology and our vampire lore. And these threshold covenants that we have with vampires, you know, the classic vampire, the scene where the vampire comes to the door and cannot hurt you if you don't invite it over the threshold. That is an actual thing. That's an actual rule in the spirit realm. And it doesn't just apply to vampires and demons. It applies to angelic beings, good or bad. And the evidence I give to you of that is Revelation 3:20. It's a verse that a lot of Christians just delegate all the way down to pray to receive Jesus into your heart. But it's really not what the verse is about. It's Jesus, that the metaphor is that Jesus is standing at a door and knocking. It says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door and invites me, and I will come in and eat with him and he with me. And so that's been relegated down in Christendom to, if you pray and receive Jesus into the door of your heart, he'll live in your heart and be your friend. And I'm not mocking that, but I really think that there's something more to Revelation 3:20 than that. What Jesus is saying is, I'm an entity from another spiritual dimension. And I need the permission of a terrestrial being before I enter in and interfere in your life. I need your permission. It's like a marriage covenant. You have to agree contractually to be a part of this relationship with this spiritual being. And so if you hear that and you open the door and you let him in, then it's a mutual agreement. And it's the same thing with these spiritual entities that are capitalizing on that. And unfortunately, in the demonic realm, they like to gain entrance through trickery and dupery. And we even see this in our fairy tales. Like it's always, the wolf dressed up like grandma and all of these things that they do to trick their way in. And I think that that's part of what is going on in the sleep paralysis experience. They come in your dream where you think everything's just a dream and there's no consequences, and you just freely do whatever you want in these dreams and think that there's nothing to it. But I think in many cases what they're doing is they are duping their way into you giving them permission to cross that threshold. So the reason I haven't regressed is once I figured out that that's what they were doing and that's what they did, I had enough information to undo those contracts and break those oaths and say that I don't consent to these. And so everything that happened over the course of my life in the astral realm, like, were there rapes going on? Were there spirit spouse ceremonies? Were there rituals? I don't know. I have no memory of any of that. But whether I remember it or not, it is still possible to break those contracts. So I guess I just wasn't maybe curious enough, or maybe I was not courageous enough to really fill in all of the blanks.
So the threshold covenant that is made inadvertently with one of these demonic entities,
Yes.
this is done in the dream world. It's not some stranger that literally knocks at your door, or could it be that as well?
I think it could be as well. Now, in America, we are kind of still, I think we're coming out of it, but for the last 50 to 75 years or more, we've still been the product of Greek Stoicism, and scientific method. And even in the Christian church, if you're religious, a lot of the supernaturalism of the Bible has been stripped out of the Bible. And yeah, there's miracles and water turns into wine, but if you go into some of the extra biblical books and some of the apocryphal books, the ones that fill in the blanks and give a lot more detail, there is an excruciating amount of supernatural things going on in the Old and New Testament that you just don't talk about in the church anymore, because we're going to be intellectual, intelligent, civilized people. So I think, and like I said, I think we're coming out of that, and I really owe it. I think we owe a lot of that to people just like you, Richard, the podcast community and the fringe community and the conspiracy community, and there's Christian conspiracy channels as well. And I think that we as a culture, churched or non-church, are really beginning to understand that this is a supernatural world again. But in the past, we've sort of been closed-minded to that. But overseas and in other cultures, where they are into and understanding and open to spiritism and voodoo and hoodoo and all that kind of stuff, witch doctors, and I could go on and on. There's many religions around the world where they understand that this is a supernatural world. And in those cultures, it is more overt. And I'll give you a great example. I got an email early on from a man who was a missionary in West Africa. And he said that they have a tradition in certain cultures in West Africa where they teach their children to never receive a gift from a stranger. Like if a stranger walks up to them on the street, usually sometimes it could be like a piece of money, but usually it's candy or an apple, like a piece of fruit, something that would be very desirable to the child. And the reason they've come upon teaching their children not to do this is, in this culture, and I'm not talking about 100 years ago, I'm talking about, modern. The child would receive the gift and they would obviously almost immediately consume this gift. So the apple or the piece of candy would be gone. And within a few days of that, they would have a nightmare. And in the nightmare, this stranger would appear to them and demand that the gift be given back. And if they can't give the gift back, they'll say, well, then you need to pay me back for the gift. And they're poor. They have no capacity to pay the gift back. So they've got this terrified little kid in a corner, and they're threatening his life or threatening his parents' life. And so he knows he's in deep doo-doo if he can't get himself out of this conundrum. So then what the stranger in the dream does, it's diabolical. It's just diabolical. He says, okay, I'm going to spot you a favor. I will forgive the debt and you will not have to pay me back if you give me permission to live in your house. And so the child, because it's the only way you can pay him back, will say, of course, of course, of course. And then what happens now is this spirit, this entity, now has been given legal permission to dwell in that house. He's been given the permission over the threshold. And then that is what is so diabolical about this. And they always have been tricksters, all the way back to the Garden of Eden. The serpent seduced Eve. There was trickery involved there, psychological trickery. And we see it elsewhere throughout scriptures and throughout the mythologies as well.
Sleeping Beauty. She comes carrying an apple, right? And then falls into a deep sleep.
Absolutely. And there is a lot of truth in plain sight in our myths and in our fairy tales. And even if you do the etymology of the word fairy, where it goes all the way back, into the Gaelic and the original, fairy doesn't mean little Tinkerbells. Like the original fairy people were the Nephilim. They were the demigods. They were the offspring of the Watcher angels and the human women. And the Watcher angels, the Greek equivalent would be the Titans, and the Nephilim, the Greek equivalent would be the demigods, the gods. So there's a lot of truth in plain sight. And even Tolkien used to say that he didn't so much write myths, he wrote history. And a lot of people always say, well, Tolkien wrote fiction. But if you actually read his correspondence, he believed that he was writing history. And if you go even into the etymology and the original meaning of the word myth and mythology, it was the oral traditions. We believe now that myth is synonymous with fiction. It's not. Mythology is the antediluvian fairy tales that take on new forms, and they get modern names, and they're kind of tailor-made for each culture. But as kooky as it sounds, a lot of these things, yes, they're caricaturized, they're exaggerated. Hollywood's got to aggrandize them, but the core skeletal structure of a lot of these films, DC, Marvel, comics, fairy tales, Disney, these are not completely made up fables. They are based on antediluvian history.
Vicki Joy, another time we'll come back and discuss further. They only come out at night, exposing the dark weapon of sleep paralysis. Stay with us. Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there. Vicki, you studied the Bible at Northwestern. Is this why you studied the Bible?
No, it's not. It is so crazy for me to be sitting here thinking I wrote a book on sleep paralysis. Sometimes I have to slap myself, but no, I mean, I was raised in a kind of a traditionally evangelical home, but I will tell you, Richard, and not all my listeners are going to appreciate this. I kind of had a red pill moment about 10 years ago after my mom died. There's something about grief, it puts you in a completely different, open minded sort of state. And a lot of information came across my desk at that period of time, stuff that I would have never listened to or given any attention to prior. And so I'm actually thankful for the grief process because it opened my mind to believe and consider things that I wouldn't have before. And what I have come to recognize is a lot of modern American Christian evangelical doctrine is very far off the mark. Now, I still believe in kind of the classic tenets of the faith. You know, the Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, and he died on the cross and he rose. I mean, I'll take that stuff to my grave.
Mhm.
I have certain non-negotiables, but what I started to learn was that the seminaries are preaching or exegeting the scriptures in a vacuum, and the context, the culture, the history, the language, and the geography of the original texts is not being considered. And a lot of the doctrines that we have been scrubbed clean, and the supernatural's been taken out, and everything has to kind of be rated G. So everything, you know, is kind of like at a Sunday school level. And we don't ever want to say dirty words like sex or orgasm. We have to say Adam knew his wife. And, you know, we're kind of in this like prolonged Victorian era of everything is taboo. And if you really begin to study the culture, the context, the history, and the language and the geography of the scriptures, and you get into the mind of the antediluvian church and the days of Noah, the days post-flood, the first century, the time of Jesus, 500 years after Jesus died, if you get to know who actually the Galatians and the Corinthians and the Ephesians were, if you know their culture and where they were on the map and what gods and goddesses they worshiped, the Bible starts not only making a whole lot more sense, but the classic Christianity starts making less and less sense. And so I'm not denying my faith, but I still think that the Bible is the cipher. It is the code book that unlocks it all, but you have to know how to read it. And I think a lot of priests and pastors and Christians have lost touch with how to read it.
Well, this is a whole other show, a whole other subject, but I agree. I think, and it's by design. I think it's been hollowed out. I grew up in the United Church,
Okay.
which was previously the Methodist Church, and now you have reverends who don't even believe in the divinity of Christ. Well, he was just he was just a wise rabbi. He was just a kind person, and we should focus on doing good deeds, and that's what's happened to the church. And it's not just the United Church.
It's not. It's everywhere. I can't remember the exact quote, but Barna did a recent study too, asking evangelicals if they believed that the devil was some sort of a personification or a metaphor or an actual entity that was like the enemy of God. And there were three different categories, but if you combined all three categories of I don't believe he's a real person at all, I somewhat agree with this statement. If you put all three of them together, it was like 64% of professing evangelical Christians that think the devil is just a Disney character, or he's just the guy on the shoulder, he's a conscience, you know, like trying to get you to do bad stuff. And man, this is what I'm talking about when I say the supernatural has been utterly stripped out of the book.
Right, right. Yes, I believe you're correct. And I think the whole UFO phenomenon starts to make sense as well through the biblical filter. So how did you end the threshold covenant
That was, I'm sorry, I know not all the listeners are going to like this. They're going to roll their eyes, but it was absolutely the Spirit of God handed me that on a silver platter. I was writing the book. It took me about a year to write the book. I'd been researching it about 10 years. It took me about a year to write the book. And there were massive portions of the book that didn't make it into the final draft. I mean, I've got 2 or 3 books sitting on the cutting room floor from what I took out, but I was missing a piece and I couldn't figure it out. And anytime I didn't know what to write, I would take a little hiatus from the writing and I would pray. I had a whole prayer team of people praying for me and with me. I would fast. And I was not just looking, I was not going to regurgitate information. All the stuff on the internet about sleep paralysis, for the most part, is a bunch of hooey. And I wasn't going to just copy and paste. If it's already out there, I don't need to say it again. I really wanted to get to the bottom of this. And so I was really praying for some supernatural insight. And what was really strange is one day I had this aha moment that vampires aren't allowed to cross the threshold. And I recognized that if you go into Google and you put in a search that was something like shadow man sleep paralysis, something to that effect, and you hit images, a lot of artwork will come up. And a vast majority of artists' renditions throughout the ages, whether it is modern like video imagery or it's pencil drawings or it's paintings, more times than not, the shadow man is hovering in the threshold of the bedroom door. And you see it from that perspective. And that is when it hit me. They're vampires. So then I started studying vampires and I realized that if you take it all the way back before Hollywood, before Stoker, before all that, it goes into these Akkadian, Mesopotamian, Babylonian, and Sumerian gods, which were the demigods. They were the offspring of the Watchers and the humans, Genesis 6. And they were of the Lamashtu class. And most of them were females. And depending on your culture, it was Lamashtu, Lamia, Lilia. This is where we get the Lilith. Everyone's heard of Lilith. And then there's a couple iterations of it that is a male energy. I think Lilu might be the male version. But if you study, instead of studying vampires, if you study Lamashtu and Lilith, you start seeing that this was really the iteration of these nocturnal prowlers, where we get the caricaturized Hollywood version. And every generation, the vampires get dumbed down more and more. I mean, think about back in black and white days, Nosferatu. That was a spooky, creepy film. And you take it all the way now to the 21st century, and we got this stupidity like Twilight, where he's taking you to prom and loves you and all this baloney. And so they're going to continue to dumb that down. So again, so we don't mind giving an invitation to it. But the Lamashtu entities were, these goddesses were, they didn't just suck your blood because they were thirsty. That is just metaphorical imagery for ravaging you into a million pieces and taking your soul, right? It's the sucking the blood is just a caricaturized, euphemistic, dumbed down version of we will take your life. Blood is the symbol of life. And the Lamashtu entities, they were known for preying on children, pregnant women, new mothers. In ancient times, SIDS or crib death, they would associate it with Lamashtu. Lamashtu came in the middle of the night. And so this is where all of that originates. And so when I put that stuff together and started researching the ancient gods, and I started to realize these things are real. And then the part that I couldn't fill in, and this is the last piece to come together, is I thought this is the part that doesn't make sense. I read a trilogy of books by a guy named Henry Clay Trumbull. He wrote books in the latter portion of the 1800s. And he wrote a trilogy of books called The Blood Covenant, The Salt Covenant, and The Threshold Covenant. And this stuff was in play up until the beginning of the hundreds. This has really only been out of public knowledge for 200 years. They were still doing blood covenants at the door and salt covenants up until the 1800s, slaughtering animals on the door for hospitality rights when you had people over, and covenanting with salt. And if you could trick your enemy, like a fellow warrior, if you could trick him into a salt covenant, he would be bound by that covenant and couldn't make war with you anymore. And I mean, just brilliant set of books. So I learned in those books that in antiquity, when we were still an agrarian society before the cities were made, the church was your house, and the high priest was the patriarch of the home, and the altar of the home was the hearthstone, which originally was outside. Like if you lived in a tent or a cave, you didn't burn the fire inside. And so the fire was where there was fellowship. It's where all the sacrifices were made. It was where there was warmth. It was where you would make your sacrifices to your deity. And so as time progressed, that hearthstone moved closer to the house. It became the threshold. And so the threshold of the home was the altar of the home. And this is, again, how they trick us. This has fallen out of our knowledge, but that doesn't mean it's not still a fact. And so there's a bunch of obscure verses in the Old Testament. You'd never put two and two together if you didn't have this knowledge. But there's one verse, for example, where all the Israelites are standing in the patriarchs of the home. They're all standing in the doorways of their home, and they're shaking their fist at God and saying, in Egypt we had food to eat, and what would you bring us out here into this desert to kill us? There's a reason why all of the men were standing at the threshold of their homes when they were doing this. They were literally standing at the altar and bringing God before the altar in a form of judgment. And so I personally don't believe the reason Yahweh was so angered in that moment was that they were pissing and moaning about the food. It was that they were literally collectively, as a nation, all simultaneously going to the altars of their home and declaring to the deity of their household, you have failed us. It was an indictment against the living God. And so we don't understand that anymore. So I began in my research to think, if we don't understand that our front door is an altar, then we're going to let things over that threshold. But the part that didn't make sense to me is when these things show up at our bedroom door, they've already made it into the home. This is the second threshold. So what am I missing? What am I missing? And it took me many months. This did not come to me easily. And I found the answer in Song of Solomon 5:2, of all strange places. And that is where the bride is asleep and the bridegroom comes to the door, knocking on the door at the middle of the night because, you know, he wants some action. And she's asleep. And so she lets the opportunity pass. And it says in Song of Solomon 5:2 of the bride, the bride was asleep, but her heart was awake. And I thought, man, that sounds like sleep paralysis. That sounds like that time in the night where you're asleep, but you are spiritually alert and you're seeing behind that veil. And Song of Solomon is a legitimate love poem where Solomon had written this poem to an actual fiance, an actual bride, but it's also a metaphor for Jesus as the bridegroom and us as the bride. And so it delved me into a further research about what was the chamber that bride was sleeping in Song of Solomon 5:2. And turns out there is an extremely rich, detailed meaning. She wasn't just in her apartment or in her bedroom. When a bride and a bridegroom were married, the bridegroom would go and prepare a place. And this is where we get the Jesus language. I go to prepare a place for you in heaven, right? The bridegroom has gone and he's making the house. And so this is where we get the wedding tradition. The bridegroom would pick up the bride, carry her over the threshold so she wouldn't stumble over it and bring a demon in on her ankles, right? It's all spiritual. But once the bride was now in her new home, this was the home of her betrothed, there was a second chamber. There was an inner chamber inside of the chuppah, the wedding tent. And this chamber was called the Tamian chamber. This was where the bride would go and shut the door. And this is where she would disrobe and get ready for the consummation. And so she'd be back there like every woman would be, making herself perfect, taken way too long. And so all sorts of anticipation is building up on both sides of the door. The bride cannot wait to be beautiful for the groom and reveal herself and get all of those accolades and the affection. And the guys on the other side, anticipation building, we're going to consummate this thing. She's my bride. But there's a rule in Semitic weddings. The bridegroom cannot enter the Tamian chamber until he's given permission. And the way this is done is that the bridegroom continues to go to the door and knocks on it and says, "Are you ready?" She said, "Not yet." Comes back later. "Are you ready yet?" "Not yet." This goes on until she says, "You can come in." We see Revelation 3:20 again. "Behold, I stand at the door and knock." And I always tell Christians, if you just look at the artwork and you think Jesus is just standing there on the outside of your house with a lantern banging on your door at the end of the night because he needs to use a payphone or he needs a cup of sugar or something. No, this is a bridegroom dying to get into that Tamian chamber because he wants intimacy with his bride. And I'm not connotating anything sexual with Jesus here, but what I'm saying is I put it together that when they're at the bedroom door, when the shadow people and the incubus and the succubus and these demonic entities, when they're at the bedroom door, they're actually at the door of the Tamian chamber. This is why so many sleep paralysis sufferers will talk about a sexual attack. It is the room of consummation. That is the threshold they've been invited over. Or, according to John 10, it's the threshold they've barged into. Jesus said, "I'm the shepherd. I am the door. My sheep know my voice. Anyone who comes in through any other way than the front gate, me, is a thief and a liar. He's a robber. He's come to kill and destroy the sheep." And so a lot of times with sleep paralysis, I think what this is those sheep robbers coming in some other way, barging into the Tamian chamber before they've been given permission to come in. And then they are ravishing the bride because they are not there for intimacy. They're there for other more sinister purposes. So that is kind of where the whole vampire threshold astral covenants came into being. And what's great about this too, gives hope to people that have had this experience, but it also makes sense of the theology and it makes sense of the vampire mythology. There's only one way to break a covenant with a vampire that you've let in. You can die, you're out of the covenant if you're dead. The only other way to undo a threshold covenant with a vampire is that the ownership of the home has to change hands. And so this is where Christians have missed the mark. I need to pray to receive Jesus into my heart. No, what you're doing is you are like in a marriage. When your spouse dies, you're free to remarry. When you invite Jesus into your heart over the threshold, he becomes the new owner of that home, and he now guards that threshold. What happens also when you get married is all previous marriage contracts are null and void, because as soon as one spouse dies, it's till death do you part. It's even in our nuptials. So the way you get out of these contracts isn't to get on Craigslist and get some sort of, medium over to your house with, holy water and a bunch of like things that, sage and all of this stuff. No, to break the covenant, the ownership of the home changes hands. So if what they're after is your soul, if what they're after is your life, your heart, if you give your heart and your soul and your life to Jesus, which is exactly what he says, love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Because once you've given him your heart, soul, mind, and strength, this isn't some narcissist saying, I want everything, I want all this attention. This is This is someone who knows the rules of the spirit realm. He knows that when you give him the keys to your heart, soul, mind, and strength, all former nuptial contracts with the spirit realm are null and void, and it provides you with protection. So that's what the salvation prayer is really about. And when we dumb it down to just people are lonely and they need a crutch, and Jesus is lonely, and God created the world because he was sad and lonely, when we dumb it down, we miss the fact that what he's really trying to do is earn for us intimacy with him and protection from our enemies.
And so for you, I mean, this put an end to it, right? And so what was the actual reciting the salvation prayer, or what was it for you?
No, so for me, I prayed to receive Jesus into my heart when I was a little kid, and this stuff kept going on and kept going on and kept going on. So sometimes it's messy, and there's no magic formula. I mean, you can pray whatever little prayer at the back of a track you want. I mean, the way that I was able to break the contract is I had to come to the conclusion of what the actual source was. And I don't think the initial source was my fault. I think it came through a lot of trauma. I was going through a lot of surgeries and stuff when I was a kid. And when you are full of anxiety and bitterness and fear, that's just like pheromones to these things. The loose, to quote Robert Monroe, right? They are attracted to those negative energies in us. And so after I had kind of exhausted all of the things that I thought that I could do, that might be attracting these things, and I couldn't get to the bottom of it. And so I did what I call it prayer mapping, but you can call it whatever you want. It's kind of like a little journaling exercise. I just wrote down in a journal every single thing I could possibly think of that could be an open door. Stuff that I did, stuff done to me, things that ancestors could have opened, because ancestors can open stuff. You can move into a house where all the doors have been opened. So I had to come to a place where I just wrote everything down. And then when I wrote down every single thing I could possibly think of, I was just reading every one of them line by line out loud, just to see if one of them would jump off the page. And so I'm kind of just praying these things over one by one. And I got to one that was really insignificant. Everybody expects it to be like you played with the Ouija board, or, you went to a party when you were in high school and slept with a guy. Everyone goes to the obvious little things, right? Well, one of the things I had on my list, and I thought it was so stupid, I didn't even want to write it on my list, but it kept coming into my mind. This is the one that left off the page. When I was about 4 years old, which is when it started, I had these invisible friends. And I just played school. Like, I knew there weren't really people there and I didn't see them. And I wasn't a lonely kid with no friends, but I liked to play school, and I had a big chalkboard, and I just had a fake class, and I would call on them. And so 3 of the people in this class kind of became these invisible friends. And what I had forgotten about, and I didn't remember until I went through this exercise, as soon as I said that out loud, I became overwhelmed with emotion. And I'm a pretty stoic person, and so it was really weird. And about 50 memories just downloaded into my brain of this 4-year-old playing school. And I remembered things. I remembered that it had started with one invisible friend, but she was so mean that I invented another invisible friend who was a boy who would protect me from her. And then I found out that he was two-faced, and he was telling me one thing and her another thing. So I invented a third invisible friend who would really be my friend. And then I realized these invisible friends had very detailed first and last names. And the first and last names did not mirror anyone I knew in real life. And then I started to realize that these invisible friends were showing up in the sleep paralysis and in the dreams, and elaborate fantasy world was being created. And it's not a fantasy world a 4-year-old could have created. It was sinister, it was scary. And as I got older and started listening to people's testimonies and getting involved in ministry, where we were ministering to survivors of satanic ritual abuse, I started realizing that these invisible friends of mine were exhibiting a lot of those behaviors. And it was an aha moment for me. And I prayed all three of those names over to God. And I said, God, I'm no longer going to, if I ever provided a vessel for those things to inhabit, I just renounced all of them. I asked God in the spirit realm to tear up all legal contracts or any oaths or agreements I made with those three people or the entities behind those three people. And I have not had a classic sleep paralysis scenario since that time. But I tell you, Richard, that really has massive implications for all of us, even for people without sleep paralysis. If there is some sort of connection to our fantasies and the people that we create in our fantasies and these lives that we want to escape in, when you look at fantasy worlds, and now it's getting more dynamic with virtual reality, augmented reality, AI, all these fantasies worlds you can go into. The question we really have to ask ourselves is, are we somehow creating empty vessels for real entities to inhabit when we start creating these people? And there's so much in scripture that talk about taking every thought captive. And again, it gets turned into God's a big meanie. We can't ever think about anything. And if you even think about sex, you've done it and you're a sinner. And like we just make everything out to be that God is just stingy and we can't ever have any fun. But what I look at is, I actually think that the Bible, instead of this big rule book, I look at it more like it's the handbook that they give you when you join the Marines. You are now this elite class of warrior. And this handbook isn't designed to ruin your fun. It's designed to keep you alive in the war.
Basic instructions before leaving Earth.
Yes, absolutely.
How do we get a copy of They Only Come Out at Night, Exposing the Dark Weapon of Sleep Paralysis?
It is available exclusively on lamarzulli.net.
That's a great place for it. LA's a terrific person.
Love them.
Vicki, thank you so much.
Thank you.
God bless.
Thank you.
Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there.